Tonight we're about to explore one of the greatest and most enduring paranormal mysteries of our planet. Are we being visited by beings from other worlds? 13 million people claim to have seen a UFO. If they exist, where do they come from? Or are they just secret military craft, weather balloons, or hoaxes? Tonight we present you with the hard evidence. You judge for yourselves. There's nothing new in the idea that we've been contacted by aliens. Take a look at these prehistoric cave paintings from France. Are these saucers hovering just above the animals? And this fresco from an ancient monastery in the former Yugoslavia, could this be a space traveler? This extraordinary object was filmed by a Dutch military psychologist and was witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people off the coast of Spain in 1989. Dutch and American experts have analysed it, and the consensus is that it could be some kind of vehicle or a weird natural phenomenon. These photographs were taken in Puerto Rico in May 1988. They showed two F-14 fighter jets attempting to intercept a UFO, but can we be sure they're genuine? Not everybody's convinced by them. Some say that they're photographic fakes. And here's a very recent video that shows another UFO. It goes behind a cloud, then it comes out the other side, stops, carries on, then it comes back, perhaps to make sure that we really spotted it, back behind the clouds, only to return again in a strange game of space peekaboo. I don't know what you make of all that, but in these days of special effects and trick photography, it's hard to say with any certainty. So tonight we're going to concentrate on the hard physical evidence and first-hand experiences as well. You know, at the height of the Cold War, just about the only thing that Reagan and Gorbachev could agree upon was that the Americans and the Soviets would unite if aliens ever invaded. They took the prospect very seriously. We caught up with former President Jimmy Carter to ask him about the day he saw a UFO. Like a lot of people, he's a little bit embarrassed to talk about it, but this is what he told us.
Well, I was gathered in a schoolyard with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
In '76, you said you'd try and release all information to the public and to scientists about other UFO sightings.
Yes.
Do you think you achieved that?
I'm not sure, but we did release a lot of the information, but I don't know how much was not released.
Interesting that. The President of the United States gave the order to tell all, but he can't say if the order was ever fully carried out. But what was it he and 20 other people saw? I'm going to talk to Jackie Minton from the Royal Astronomical Society. Jackie, what do you make of ex-President Carter's claims that he saw a UFO?
Well, I've heard reports like this many times before, and in fact, I've seen it with my very own eyes. When a very bright star or a planet gets close to the horizon, the atmosphere and all the movements in the atmosphere cause the star or planet to joggle about and, in fact, flash all the colours of the rainbow. You really get the impression that things change in colour. You really get the impression that it's dancing about and changing brightness. I think that he saw a planet or a star.
OK, thank you. I'm going to go now to Tim Good, who is Britain's best-known UFO researcher. What do you make of what Dr. Mitton's just said?
Well, of course, we all know, those of us who've studied the subject, that the vast majority of all UFO reports can be explained in terms of atmospheric phenomena, stars, planets, and so forth. But in the case of Jimmy Carter, first of all, I'd like to point out that he served in the United States Navy as a line officer on nuclear submarines, and it's mandatory for naval officers to study stars and planets so they know what they look like for navigation and so forth. And secondly, Carter first revealed the details of that sighting that he had back in 1969 in Georgia during his presidential campaign, and I don't think he would have risked his reputation somehow to talk about flying saucers when he wanted to become president.
So, whilst we're talking about presidents, didn't Gorbachev recently refer to UFOs?
In 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev confirmed the reality of the UFO phenomenon and said that we must study it seriously. He's also, as you said earlier, discussed the subject with Ronald Reagan, who himself had a UFO sighting when he was governor of California. So it is treated very seriously at a high level.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. We're going to look at some footage now. What we're about to look at, some viewers may find a bit disturbing. So if you are squeamish, please look away now.
It's hard to believe what happened in this peaceful place.
It sounded almost like a freight train that was coming into the house. The house began to shake, and it startled both of us. I got up from the bed, went to the window, looked out across my pasture, and about probably 30, 40 feet from the house in the pasture field was an object, and it was hovering on the ground, almost touching the ground. In fact, I was frightened that it had tore up the fence around my house.
When it was gone, Reverend Watkins couldn't find the family's pet Cocker Spaniel. It's not been seen since.
I heard a loud sound, a shrill sound, and I flipped the lights off in the barn. That was the first thing I did. And then I listened more closely, and I came out the front of the door and came through this gate and up to this gate here. And by the time I got here, I met my wife coming from the house, and we met right here at this gate.
And so I looked up, and that's when I saw something that was making this huge noise.
Nearby, early one morning, Tommy Cole found one of his cows was dead. A large piece of hide had been removed with surgical precision, but there was no blood anywhere. The local vet was completely baffled.
There was nothing that showed up. He could not give me the cause of death.
No cause of death. Did he examine any of the excision tissue?
Yes, he did.
And what did he say?
He could not determine as to what cut it, except with a sharp instrument.
He did confirm it was a sharp instrument.
Right.
Neighboring farmers in the surrounding county started filing similar reports. Inexplicable deaths of cattle left with neat surgical incisions. Others described major dissections, which had removed whole organs and large sections of tissue. Cattlemen with years of experience had seen nothing like it. They all started asking the same question. Could these mutilations be linked to the reports of flying discs and beams of light coming from the sky?
At this point, I want to come to Linda Moulton Howe, who's an American journalist who's investigated quite thoroughly these animal mutilations over the last 30 years. Can you tell us what that's about?
It was provoked by global reports, not just North America, but in other parts of the world, in which animals, cattle, horses, large animals, small animals, every domestic you can think of, as well as wild animals, found with the same eerie, strange pattern of excisions, bloodless and trackless.
So what makes you think then that it isn't a maniac, wielding a knife doing this sort of thing?
Because it's global, because it's been going on for almost 40 years, and the pattern from country to country is, to me, an indication, combined with eyewitness testimony that have seen not only the beams of light, but some ranchers have seen what they describe as non-human creatures about 4 feet tall with large black eyes, actually in pastures in broad daylight, moving these animals out of the pasture that are later found mutilated.
Is there anything unusual about the incisions themselves?
Yes. One of the hardest pieces of evidence we have comes in pathology examination of the edges of the tissue, in which the hemoglobin itself seems to have been subjected to high heat far beyond autolysis.
Okay, I'll be back to you, Linda. Dr. John Altschuler has just arrived from the United States. He's brought some tissue samples with him which have been taken from these unfortunate animals. I wonder if you can tell us about these samples, Doctor.
The green dot here is a bag that contains normal hide tissue, and it's very pliable, very soft, can be rolled, and it can be cut with great ease, and I'll show that in a minute. If we take tissue from an animal that has been killed and mutilated with some mechanism we don't really know, it's very different. It's very firm and very hard. If we try and cut the normal tissue, it's really very easy to cut through the tissue. It cuts with great ease. If we cut with the same force here, you can't cut it. It's very hard.
What do you think causes that?
Actually, looking at it grossly, you can't be sure, but when you look at it microscopically, there are a number of changes that are classic for heat. for high temperature, for burning.
What, like a laser?
Like a laser, but in laser you get charcoal formation, and you don't in the tissue here.
Dr. Harrell Thompson is a veterinary pathologist from Glasgow University. You've analysed cattle mutilations in the past.
Yes, I have, and if I could deal first of all with Linda's comments. In my experience, cattle mutilations fall into three groups. There are live animals which are attacked by other animals. In that case, you find large wounds and lots of blood. Then there are animals which are attacked by, let us call them sick people. And that's fortunately, it's a very rare event. It does happen, but it's very rare. The third and the largest category that I encounter in my professional career, and which I think is also the explanation of many of the cases that Linda sees, are animals that die of natural causes in the field and are then eaten by scavengers, by the birds of the air, by the beasts of the field. And they do this in a pattern and in a form which is exactly the form which Linda has described.
So why is the surgical work so neat?
The surgical work is so neat because the beak of a bird is very sharp and their eyesight is very acute.
I have yet to see, and I can't even imagine, the temperature changes that are obvious in the microscope, and the microscope doesn't lie.
What do you say to that, Doctor?
Can I handle the piece of firm tissue? I believe that what's happening here is the effects of the environment, the effects of the sunlight, the effect of the air, the effect of extremes of normal temperature, which are in fact causing a form of dehydration and desiccation.
Why would you get desiccation or drying changes and environmental change in one part of the animal and not in the other? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, Linda, I want to come to you right now because you've brought a tape for us tonight that we're going to look at. It's one of your most important witnesses, Judy Dougherty. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
She's one of 5 family members who were traveling outside of Houston into an agricultural area, and all 5 people in the car argued about a light, a very bright, intense light that was pacing the car. Finally, with all this argument, Judy Dougherty, the car pulls over to the side of the road. She gets out to try to look at this light. Everybody in the car remembers her getting back in, complaining about being nauseous and thirsty, and they all drive home to be astonished by the relatives, worried, saying, "Where have you been?" They were 2 hours late, and no one in the car was aware that there was any time loss.
The whole account is over 4 hours long. We're just going to see a brief clip from it.
Now you're standing outside your car. Now you're looking up. You can describe your impressions. What are your impressions?
It's like a spotlight that's shining down on the back of my car. And it's like it has substance to it. I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free. And it's like it's being sucked up. It's done very quickly. But the calf doesn't die immediately.
How is it being cut up? With knives?
Instruments of some kind.
Can you describe the instruments?
They're like a knife, but they have different kind of handles. More like a razor that's doesn't have movable parts, but like a straight razor type. There's tissue. It's laid out flat and smooth. It glistens. And the needles, there's needles in it, or what appears to be like needles that may be probes, I don't know.
As a hypnotist, I know that hypnosis is not a truth drug. Why did she need hypnosis?
This was an effort to try to understand what might have happened that subsequently caused the headaches and the nightmares, and an entire family of 11, 12 people remembering this trauma that night.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Susan Blackmore, you're a psychologist. What do you make of that?
Well, you're right that hypnosis is no truth drug, and you know better than I do that when you hypnotise people and get them to try to remember something that's only very hazy, they come up with lots and lots of stuff. But that stuff is a mixture of memories and fantasies. And someone who's already having headaches and problems of that kind may have hallucinations, and then when they're hypnotised or they have a therapist who talks to them a lot, they will dredge up all sorts of ideas. I think it would be impossible to know whether those were memories or fantasies. OK, I'm going to go to Rose and to Val. You had a similar experience with another friend a few years ago, didn't you? Can you tell us about that?
That's right, it's 14 years ago now. Our conscious memories of actually seeing the UFO were all identical.
Where did this happen?
In Shropshire, along the A5, between
Okay.
Shrewsbury and Wellington.
Did you all have the same account?
Our accounts weren't identical.
What was
by any
different
means.
about them?
Well, for a start off, we weren't together. When we were taken on board the craft, we were put into separate rooms. Under hypnosis, our stories were different, but when they were put together, then they did make a whole.
And you were all hypnotised?
Yes, by 3 different doctors, on different occasions as well.
By 3 different doctors?
Yes.
On different occasions?
Yes.
And what's similar about it?
That the story just gels together when you see the tapes and when you find out everything that's come out under hypnosis. This is 10 years of hypnosis.
What did the doctors think? Do they believe in UFOs?
No, they didn't. But I think I have reason to believe that they had different opinions afterwards.
And what do you say to people, you know, who think that this is all weird?
Well, yeah, it is weird. I mean, we still think it's weird. You know, I mean, this is something that is unusual. I mean, it doesn't happen to everybody. Unless you've actually seen something, then of course you're not going to believe. It's not easy to believe something unless you've seen it.
OK, I'd like to come to Harry. Harry, you're a lawyer. You encouraged them to go to a hypnotist, didn't you?
I asked them to, and they consented, yes. We wanted to retrieve, or try to retrieve, the missing and confused memories. As Rose said, the hypnotists that we used, none of them believed in UFOs, so had there been any influence from the hypnotist to the witnesses, it would have been in the opposite direction. The witnesses do not remember, after hypnosis, what they said whilst hypnotised. They are dependent for their memory, largely on watching the videotapes of themselves hypnotised. Had these 3 ladies seen a fire and stopped and dialed 999 at a telephone kiosk, I don't think anybody would have said to them, well, close your eyes and count to 10 and see if the fire's still there. I think people would have accepted what they had said, that they were looking at, what they claimed they were looking at.
OK, I want to throw it to the audience right now. Yes, sir. Can I come to you, sir?
Yes, certainly. I cannot help the feeling that if you tell a myth enough, it becomes the truth in people's minds. We have the image of aliens, of UFOs, plugged into our mind constantly by science fiction, by accounts, by images that we have through hypnosis. It's something like the near-death syndrome with the light. And I do believe that there is not enough substantial evidence to say this is taking place, that in fact it is the mind generating its own truths.
I'm going to come now to Tim Good. You've spent years researching this. What are the most impressive things that you've found?
Well, of course, there have been millions of reports, but anything from 70 to 90% can be explained away. However, there remains, obviously, hundreds of thousands of cases which resist adequate explanations. Included in that percentage are the thousands of reports by highly qualified observers, such as airline pilots, military pilots. There have been radar trackings, there have been power cuts, there have been interference with aircraft communications, interference with aircraft weapon systems, disappearing aircraft confirmed, and so forth.
OK, thank you. I'm going to come to Graham Shepherd, who's an airline pilot. You had a UFO experience.
Yes, I did. Back in the 60s, I was lucky enough to have a very good daylight sighting and a nighttime sighting, and I would regard them as definitive because they were both radar confirmed.
Are other airline pilots having these kind of experiences?
To my knowledge, I would say it's 5 to 10% of pilots have had experience.
Is there a commercial pressure upon pilots not to report these things?
There is a commercial pressure. In my own particular case, in a previous life, the world's favourite airline, to put it succinctly, declared that my interest in UFOs and their commercial interests were not compatible.
So do you think that there's a fear amongst airlines that if the pilots start talking about flying saucers, then people might, you know, become worried about the pilots or something like that? Is that what it's about?
Well, from the commercial point of view, I can understand how they feel. And in all honesty, if I was running an airline, I'd require my pilots to stay quiet about anything, any phenomenal incident in the air. OK, I'd
like you to look at some examples now. We've got some film here. We've gathered together various recent shots of UFOs. I wonder if you can tell us, Graham, Does this look anything like the disc that you saw?
This is just a light in the sky as far as I can tell. It's very difficult to make out what it is. This again, it needs clarification. I think it's an interesting picture, but doesn't look anything like the thing that I saw. Now this one here is a light, and I would describe this as very similar to the nighttime sighting. In fact, we saw two radar confirmed performing very high-speed aerobatics.
We're going to see it closer now. Does that look like it?
This is very, very similar to the daylight sighting we had when we were within a quarter of a mile of something that looked just like that.
Tim Good, what do you make of that footage?
I thought the last one was quite impressive, taken in Mexico last year.
What was impressive about it?
The shape of the craft. Now, of course, that can be fabricated. We all know that. But just the way it looked, it's just an impression. I haven't studied the film, and sometimes the film is just as good as the photographer. So I would like, ideally, to have met the photographer and got to know more details about the film, how it was taken, what camcorder and everything. But I think it's a good film. The little strobe effect underneath was good. The others I was not so convinced by. The best one, to my mind, is the one taken in Gibraltar in 1989, of the ones we've seen tonight.
Which is the footage we're looking at right now. This one, though, particularly intrigues me. Obviously, the bright lights and aircraft, but look at that little thing darting around it. Obviously, these are impossible maneuvers for an aircraft. This was filmed outside a top-secret military base in Nevada. Is there a cover-up going on? Because that's got to be the obvious question.
Of course there's a cover-up. It's proven in the release of thousands of intelligence documents released under provisions of the Freedom of Information Act in the United States. For decades, agencies such as the CIA, FBI, Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, Army, Naval, Air Force Intelligence, State Department, and so forth, denied having any serious interest in UFO research until the Freedom of Information Act, and they were forced to reveal thousands of documents which prove that there has been a cover-up. Because, on their own admission, all those agencies admit freely that they are withholding many more documents, some at an above top-secret level, in the interests of national security. So of course there's a cover-up. I mean, this started back in 1947, when we know from various documents that the findings by the United States government regarding flying saucers were classified higher than the hydrogen bomb.
Why would the governments cover this up?
There are many reasons for the cover-up, some of them entirely valid, and I support them. First of all, it's very embarrassing for the military to admit the existence of alien vehicles invading our airspace against whom we have inadequate defense. And some of these devices are dangerous. There have been incidents involving missing aircraft, people who have been seriously injured, major power blackouts. There's a major national security threat at risk here.
Tim Good, thank you. Airline pilots, farmers, housewives, the ex-president of the United States and millions of others all claim to have seen UFOs. Are they all mad or just honestly mistaken? Or is there something else that we should take rather seriously about this? Just before we finish, here's a quote. "Space travel is bunk." Now, when do you think that was said? 200 years ago? 100 years ago? Actually, it was said by the Astronomer Royal 1 week before the Russians launched their first dog into orbit. Thanks for watching tonight. Live long and prosper.